The sponsor, of course, develops, monitors, and controls the risks. Tools, 4 phases, of course. First is identify the risk. It's the most important phase because it relies heavily on experience and insight of the project team. Key output is, of course, risk checklist. What I have done here is to give you a simple WBS and a risk assessment for an automobile. I just used an automobile as an example because we have a heterogeneous audience. So as you can see, I have given the engine there, the fuel, the electrical part, undercarriage, powertrain, brakes, hydraulics, structural. So I have looked at each one of them. I have done a WBS of that, and I'm actually doing a risk breakdown structure for each of those. And the blue ones are the low risk category items. The yellow one are the medium risk category. The red ones are the high risk categories. So one could do this to the assess level of risk. Once the risk is identified, the probability of the risk is approximated as a percentage. That requires, basically it is based on gut feeling. It's advice from the subject matter expert. Expertise, experience learned, that corporate lessons learned, past projects handled. The knowledge management comes into play here, industry lessons learned. The next task is to assess the impact amount and cost estimation. Generally, if you want to do a qualitative, you can always say high, medium, low. You can define what is high, what is medium, and what is low. Then, of course, you can go for a quantitative risk analysis as well. There are specialized mathematical models available like Monte Carlo method. I will briefly talk about it, not too much because it is highly mathematical. Just to go back on what we started off, when you do a risk breakdown structure, if you remember, you have all those individual items. You have identified the risk that can possibly happen to individual items, line items, and then you have mitigated them or taken care of them. After doing all of that, ultimately there will be still a residual risk. Now we need to find that residual risk, and that's what we are doing in Monte Carlo simulation. Individually we have mitigated. Finally, for the whole project, we need to find out what is the residual risk that can happen. So, to talk about qualitative risk analysis, typically considers schedule, political situation, environmental factors, staffing, and things like that. We also identify the risk triggers, and we can also do an independent risk analysis by experts, and we can do an independent risk audit by an audit committee. And then we prepare a risk response plan, which is typically any one of the 4. It could be avoiding the risk, it could be mitigating the risk, it is accepting or reducing the risk. It is a continuous process. It's not that one time you do it and you forget about it. So if you have done it before bidding, then at periodic intervals you are reviewing and redoing the risk analysis. Why? Because some of the old risks identified would have just gone away and new risks would have come up. So the new risks have to be identified. And also the probability which you have estimated earlier could have changed. Maybe the probabilities would have changed totally, and some of the risks would have become major as on today, what was identified as minor. Ultimately, the objective is to make a kind of a structured risk management process to lead to good decisions, and we can communicate them effectively. Tools, well, multiple tools, qualitative tools. It is just probability and impact. It's an ordinal rating to denote order. Typical, I showed you that screen earlier in terms of metrics. You can also give the probability factor and express it in terms of probability. So that's a typical 10 weeks delay and things like that. It's easy to administer, naturally everybody understands. Only thing is you need definitions. It is difficult to enforce unless you have some definition. That's why I gave you the definition. What is meant by low, what is meant by major, what is meant by catastrophic. All those rules and processes have to be defined first. So the qualitative risk analysis process is to prioritize. The inputs are the risk register that you have created already, a risk management plan, scope statement, the organizational process, and the assets. And the risk register updates come up because of the analysis. The tools and techniques, risk probability and impact assessment, impact metrics, the quality assessment, categorization, and risk urgency and expert judgment. These are the tools used. So the risk management plan, basically budgets, activities, risk management, risk categories, all these are defined in the risk management plan. Typically, the analysis is to make sure that the risks that you have defined will occur. If at all it happens, then what is going to be your strategy for handling the risk? Okay, let me now get into the quantitative. Quantitative is a bit time consuming. It requires estimation. There is one disadvantage with quantitative. It is misleading in a way that numbers give you precision and specificity. This is a thought process people have. But you must remember that we have started our assessment based on a subjective judgment of probability. So there is a subjectivity which is actually leading to some quantitative estimations. So the errors in the subjectivity will lead to errors in your final estimation. So it's only a guideline. It is not that it is precise or specific. Typically, of course, it is difficult if the team resists working with numbers. And it is substantially more valuable in response